Thanks for clicking on this Excel video. What we're going to look at today is video number 95, and it is about the creation of a player dashboard. That term gets thrown about a lot, but no one really goes into detail as to what it means and how to take the right steps to get something useful. I'm going to create a dashboard for you over the next couple of videos, and it's not necessarily something you can just copy and go and use yourself, but hopefully the concepts behind it are something that you can copy. So the steps before I begin are to draw your attention to a previous video. In video number 88, if you haven't already seen it, I talk about what's important about creating an Excel database. Now, a database is a glamorous term. Most of the time in Excel, you're not really doing that at all. But what you are doing is trying to set out your data as clearly as possible so that things like dashboard creation are made easy. In this dashboard project, what we're looking to do is to take data from several sheets and pull them into one report. So that's really what the concept of a dashboard is, providing key information in a number of areas in one place so that a user can get an overall picture of what's going on. Let's have a look at some of those sheets now. I've got a training load sheet, really hasn't got any complex structure to it. Name, date and week are descriptive fields. That's what video number 88 talked about. Those descriptive fields allow you to do your analysis easily. After that, we've got our three data fields, which are duration RPE and session RPE load. On our next sheet, we've got wellness data, 4 data points, and the same 3 descriptive variables in columns A, B, and C. Next, some match performance data. Now, I did a big project on match performance data, in particular getting the data in the first place and then analyzing it, and you can see that by clicking on this link on the right here. Videos 89 through to 94 covered that. But once again, we've got on the left hand side some descriptive fields, which are date and player. There's a new descriptive field that we haven't seen before because this is relating to match data, so it's got a match ID field. Then it's got whether it's a win or a loss, the opponent, and so on. And the actual data starts in column F, which is shots, tackles, passes, receives, and errors. Next we go to medical. Same thing again. We've got 3 descriptive fields, A, B, and C. A training type, and then simply whether or not they're available. There's a rating system, which I'll talk you through in a second. And if they were unavailable, what was the reason? Was it illness, injury, or other? 2 more sheets to look at. One of them is physical profile data. I have gone through this in 3 different ways. In the green shaded columns, we've got just raw data. Yo-yo, squat 1RM, a time for a 10-meter sprint, and a counter movement jump height. I then used a descriptor such as good, excellent, okay, poor, or I also put them into a different band based upon some benchmarks, and we'll talk about that shortly. Again, we've got descriptive fields in column A and B, and a specific descriptor in column C. Last one, and this is common in my line of work, is that you've got individual updates. So when you have case management discussions about an athlete, you talk about what's going well and what's not, and how you might be able to improve performance. I wrote a couple of examples just in the first few rows, but then I just put a generic comment all the way down to the bottom to save time. So on the left hand side we can see we've got a date, an athlete name, and then we've got some specific descriptors, which is who wrote the comment, what was their field of expertise, and was it something that's really important or just really a commentary. So we've got a bunch of different sheets to look at. We've got 6 different data tables that we are pulling together, and the way that they get pulled together relies upon a control panel sheet. If you've watched any of my videos before, you'll know this already. I've got a list of names, and that means that in all of the other sheets you cannot just type a name in, you have to pick it from a list. And that means the spelling is always correct, and that's important when you're doing formulas. We've got a bunch of other lists all the way through, including dates, opponents, ratings from poor to excellent. We talked about in the physical table that we had banding. And right over on the right hand side as we scroll, we can see that I've got a status around whether they're fully available for training, whether there's minor or significant modifications required, or they're unavailable. The last one is just that categorization. If they did have issues, 0, 1 or a 2, and therefore couldn't train, how are we labeling that? Illness, injury or other? And that's quite important when you're trying to do a bit of analysis around training load and injury types and things like that. So there we are, we've got our data tables, we've got control panel reference tables, and we can go back to our dashboard and say, okay, now we know everything's in place. What do we want things to look like? Now, usually when I'm building a large project for someone, I will have a specific report relating to match performance, a specific report relating to physical profiling and so on, as well as a dashboard. So the dashboard is really an abbreviated version of the specific report. So you really don't want to have too much information in each area on your dashboard. If I'm doing a consulting project, I will send a picture like this to people. I require them to draw me some pictures to say this is what we want our reports to look like. And if they draw that on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, I can then potentially turn what's the top row of these pictures into the bottom row. I'm going to delete that out the way now, but I just wanted to talk about that at the beginning. And so that's what I say over here on the right when I talk about a mock-up. You want to be able to picture in your head what the dashboard looks like. Step 1 of the dashboard, if it's for a particular player, then you need a drop-down box for the player. Why don't we do that from scratch? On my control panel sheet, we've got a list of names. If I select it, we can see we've got a table called athlete names. On the data tab, data validation, and because it's inside a table, it's a little bit more tricky than just using a named range, but it's worthwhile, and once you get used to it, it's not too bad. So TBL athlete names, and now we've got that drop-down list. It's cut off a bit, so I'm just going to merge 3 cells across, and my standard concept is to make sure people know that this is a lookup table. Now we've got something to work with. Let's say we've chosen this athlete. These are our 6 areas, so what I would do is try and decide what do I want to see at the top. For me, it's a competition between 2 things. One is updates and one is match performance. I would think that having updates at the top is useful. You may have it just off to the side in a little corner somewhere, but I'm not going to get too caught up in how things look at the moment. I just want to make it functional. So I'm going to pull these out the way. I'm going to figure out how to get, let's say, the 2 or 3 most recent updates written about this athlete. Now I could do a whole video on this, but what I want to do is just step you through the process. I've added a new sheet and I'm going to call it workings. Just above this grid, I'm going to put an equal sign and reference back to here. I now want to be able to find the last, let's say, 3 rows of comments made about this athlete. First, I'm going to go to the page, click inside it, go to the Design tab. Now I can see that it's called TBL Updates. I can also see that the first 4 rows are either blank rows or headings. So our data begins in row 5. To pull out the most recent rows of data from a table is relatively easy. What you need to know is a row number, and you just feed that row number into an index function and you get what you need. So the hard part is getting that row number, because we've got a criteria that we have to use to find the row number. We can't just use max, although max if could be an option, but large is a much better way to do things. So inside a function called aggregate, there's a whole plethora of options that you can choose from. And if we just drag the scroll bar down a little bit, we get large. It opens up another option, of which probably not the best time to focus on it, but avoiding errors, option number 6 is the one that we want to choose. Everything that isn't for this athlete is going to display as an error, and so that's why using that number 6 option will just eliminate all those errors out of the array. What are we trying to return? Well, we want a row number. What do we want a row number of? The updates table, where the athlete name is. The data starts in row 5, so we want row 5 to be seen as 1, because that's the first row of the table, which is why I just put -4 there. If your table started at row 9, you'd have to put -8 in this particular place. The next thing that we have to do is put our criteria in. So we want to return the rows where the athlete name equals our selected name. And in the first row of this little grid, we want the most recent update. So we want the largest row. If I hit enter now, we get row 289. If we go to the updates table and we go to B289, what we'll find is it's not quite the one we wanted, and that's because it's actually 293, which is 4 more than that. That's because the first 4 rows are blank, right? And so this row 293 in the sheet is actually record 289. So a little bit complicated there, but once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. So we can see that this is a mental consult, and there was some feedback and comments just randomly put in there. So why don't I go back to the workings? Let's extract that out. Index, TBL updates. We want to extract the date. We've got the row number. I'm just going to put a dollar in front of the A. The format's not going to be right straight off the bat, so we have to change it to short date and then drag it across. We don't need the athlete name, but what we do want is the focus area and the comment. If I drag this down, let's say 5, I could manually change this, or I could have a clever little setup where it just happens automatically. But the beauty of this now is I can just drag it down and it'll populate out. If I decided that I wanted to put priority in here, then it'll be as simple as that to set up. What's good about this priority column or rating is that you can do fancy things like use colors to show the high priority areas. And now we've only got a single criteria. Show me the last 5 updates for Caitlin. We could have changed our mind on that. I put an extra criteria in here that says we want only priorities that are level 1 or 2. So this is all going to change. We can see that I would have been better off to set this up slightly differently. There we go. So now we've only got priority 1 and 2 items coming up. So priority is less than 3 is now part of this aggregate function that gives us the criteria. So let's have a trip back to the dashboard. We could have done all those formulas here. It's up to you really. I don't think it matters too much. I like to keep it separated. So I'm going to copy that, go to the dashboard and say paste. I'm going to do a direct reference to that workings table. It's often a bit of mucking around to make it look how you want it to, but shouldn't take us too long. And because strength and conditioning is a long word, I'm going to put the comments starting in column F. So with a little box around it and a bit of formatting, we've got some updates in place now. Now let's look at, let's say, match performance. Go on to the next one. We're trying to pull up some information about match performance. Now we could put the most recent match, we could put all range of things. So let's not get bogged down on what content we pull through. Let's just pick something and pull it through. Now we could go to the workings area and start there, or we could directly import into this dashboard sheet. I like going through the workings page because it allows you to be a bit more descriptive. You can write commentary and notes about how you did it in case someone else has to go in and change it later. Firstly, let's check the match performance. We've got 5 areas. What might we do? I've written in red here something that you might do. Let's say we've got an overall rating and we're going to put something between 0 and 100 based upon what they've done in these 5 areas. I'm just going to make it up, so it won't have any relationship, but it'll be good for an example. A random score between 20 and 90, all the way down. Because this is a volatile formula, every time I hit F9 or enter, it's going to update. So just to change that, I'm going to select everything, copy, paste values. So that's now just a normal number. So I've just put a little note for myself there that all the workings relating to the match performance data section of the dashboard are going to be here. So we could decide that we want to pull in some information for the last 5 matches for this athlete. So let's have a look at doing that. Generally, when you look at information about an athlete's match performance, you want to move left to right on the chart. So I'm going to have the most recent match be number 5. We've learned how to do this already in the example above. So I'm going to whip through this pretty quickly. We want the largest row number, excluding errors. Don't know what the name of the table is, but because I use a consistent method all the time, I just type TBL, and here's all my tables pop up. One of the great things about using tables on a PC is this feature. Match stats. Now I didn't look to see how many blank rows there were. I'm going to put a space in front of the equals so I don't have to start that formula again. And I can see that it's a bit different to the other sheet, which is not a good idea. I was inconsistent, so this has made my life a bit harder. But there's 3 blank rows. A title, a blank, and then table headings. So first row of data is row 4. Let's go back to the workings. And so we need to go -3 there. Next, let's put our criteria in. TBL match stats player equals the selected player up in B2. Just a single criteria. I click on this for now, but I do need to change it, because what I actually want is the largest one. So I'm just going to have to reverse this scale. So the rightmost point on our chart is going to be the most recent. That's why the largest row needs to be here. If I drag this up, we should get descending numbers, and that looks good to me. Let's just pull out the rating for the first chart. Index function is what we need. TBL match stats. Rating should be the last option. And we've got the row number. So this is an easy one. Copy that down. Probably a good idea to get some kind of match ID. If we go to the match performance table, we can see that we could either put something like the opponent and the result, or just simply the match ID or the date. Let's use the match ID. I like that. I think that's a good way to make it clear for the user. The only problem sometimes with match ID is that it can be quite long, and therefore on the axis of a chart it can cause you a few problems. Back to the workings. We've decided on match ID. If I copy this, paste it in, all I have to do is change the field number and drag that across so that we're still focusing on the row, because we need the row number to give the index correctly. So this is the match, this is the rating. We can do a chart with that. I'm going to start by doing this. Insert. Ideally you should use a line graph for this because it's chronological data. We know this is 0 to 100. That's our scale. So we need to lock that in. That's best practice. If I click select data on this chart, what I can do is pull in those match IDs, and you can see it's already giving us a bit of grief, and depends how big the chart is as to how much of a hassle that's going to be. I like having a really custom and specific chart title, so I'm going to make one. And I can do that by writing some text inside quotes and then linking up to our selected name. Now in this chart title box I can simply directly connect to that cell, and this chart will now provide us with a dynamic label. Cut the chart out, go to the dashboard, paste it in, and we can say that this is going to be half of our match performance section. There's a whole bunch of other things you could do. You could have a small little chart for each of the sub areas. Heaven forbid you could do a little radar chart with the 5 areas, but then you'd have to figure out some way to scale them. You could look at progress in the different areas. So you have got quite a few options. And I think for this case what I'd like to do would be to utilize this space here and do exactly that. Either create a dynamic chart or create some small charts for each of the 5 areas. Now we've got enough space to do about 3 rows for each area. So what it might be neat to do is to have a mini chart for each of those 5 subcategories. Let's see how we might do that. Firstly, we've got to get the data. So to go back to the working sheet is the first step to take. I'm going to narrow this column down so we can have it all together. On the match performance page, I'm going to make my life easier just by copying those headings, going back to the workings. So these are the 5 areas. Let's do some extracting. The good thing about this is if we copy this, we don't have to do that much work to be able to just drag this across. I do have to lock in to make sure that row number stays fixed on column B. So if I pull this down and drag this across, I get all my data. So that's the easy bit done. Once you know how to use those index functions and those row numbers, really does make some of this stuff relatively easy to extract. Now we could decide a whole bunch of ways to present this data. But as mentioned, when you're dealing with time data, it's always good to do it in line charts rather than column charts, even though they sometimes look better. So that's what my plan is. I'm going to select this, insert a little line chart, and try and figure out a way to make that chart show us just an indicator of progress. What we're looking to do is have a chart occupy about 3 lines, so it's not always easy to get this right. Firstly, let's cut it out, put on the dashboard, and see how small we need to make it. Not going to put any axis labels in there because that's just going to kill our chart. It's not going to give us any ability to actually have any perspective on the data. I do need a title. It does seem like it's taking a bit too much space though, so I'm going to reduce that down to something a bit less. I've chosen 10. I'm going to pull this little chart piece up and drag hopefully to the maximum dimensions of the chart. So we've gone across 4 rows here, but let's pretend that that's okay. I'm going to cut that, go back to the workings because it's just easier to operate over here. I want to duplicate that. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. So we've got 5 charts and we can pretty easily just drag. These new features of charting are very handy when you've got to do a project like this. You don't have to rebuild the chart each time. Dragging and dropping is going to give you everything you need. Alright, so if I hold my control key down, I can select them all together, cut them, go back to the dashboard and paste them in. Now this isn't perfect. I've taken up too much space, but it's the sort of stuff you can worry about later. You can overlap them a bit and do a few things to create a little bit more wiggle room. But for now, I'm okay with those 5 being like that. There is a feature of Excel now which is great for this kind of mini trend, and it's called a sparkline. If you click on the Insert tab, you can see there's a little section here called sparkline, and you can set that up and it looks quite cool. You have to arrange your data in the right way for it to work, but these are regular charts. These sparkline charts are really worth investigating. If you've got a little bit of time, just Google sparklines. You'll see some wonderful YouTube videos that talk you through that. And so that's effectively creating a really quite small and compact version of this chart that I've made here using the regular chart wizard.
Just before we move on, I want to add one little piece of detail to each of these 5 mini charts, and that is to just put a data label on the rightmost point. So clicking once on the line selects all points. Clicking just on one point a second time allows you to just add a single data label. I'm going to do this for all 5 lines. And there we just have a little bit of extra detail right at the end of the line to show us what the current score is for the most recent match. Now we've got a slight sort of misalignment here. The chart on the left, which is our big chart, is a bit smaller than the other one. So we've got a couple of options here. One of them is to drag it down and make it bigger, like so. That might seem a bit unnecessary. If you were going to do that, I'd probably be trying to figure out what else I could put on this chart to make it worth that amount of space, or I could do the opposite and make it smaller and put something in this gap here. And that could be anything really, comparison to a position group, reference to previous seasons, or something else. But we've got some space and some options there, and I'm not going to do anything with that space now, but it's definitely one of the things that you end up having to look at when you're nearing the end of this dashboard process. You've got to figure out how to make it look good and fill the space well. So we've done 2 out of 6. The next one that I want to look at is physical. That's because I want to have wellness, load and medical be grouped together in almost like a second page or a second part of this project, and it'll be done in video number 2. So do physical now. Let's check out the physical data set. Inside it we have 4 categories: fitness, strength, speed and power. For each of them, just to keep this example very brief and simple, we've only got one test: yo-yo, a squat, speed 10 meters and counter movement jump. Now on the basis of that, we've got a fitness band calculation. If we go to the control panel, we can see here that we have put in place 5 levels. Level 1 is the lowest, level 5 is the highest. And I've just made up some arbitrary numbers there that help classify the results for each athlete. I've got 1 set of banding here. We would probably have more than 1 set based on positions or age groups or squads if we were doing a proper example. But for now we've got 1 set, and we can see that for yo-yo, anything between 0 and 1750 meters is considered level 1. Let's go back to our data set and just see what that looks like. So we've got the first athlete here, Amanda Baker. Let's change her score, and we can see that her fitness band changes to 1 there. If I undo it, goes back to level 3. Change to 2500, it's going to go up to level 4. So all that banding score is doing is referencing the result of the athlete against a reference table housed in the control panel sheet. Over on the left in columns D through G, it's probably the simplest way to go about things. It's almost like a planning session model where a coach might look at the different qualities of an athlete and rate them just using an arbitrary scale of good, okay, poor, excellent, and things like that. What I intend to pull across into our dashboard is all 3 of these numbers. So let's go and check that out. So I've populated a little grid here, and we could either pull directly from the physical sheet to here, or we could go through a workings page. Now in most cases I'm keen on always going through a workings page just to make the process as easy to understand as possible for later correction and edits. But just to show you that it doesn't matter, I'm going to pull directly into this sheet from the physical page without going through that intermediate step. So previously we had a column set up that had the row number in it. This time I'm going to use an index function with the aggregate inside it, just to demonstrate that you can do it all together. It is a fairly tough formula if you're not good at this stuff, but nevertheless, here we go. What are we trying to extract from? A table called TBL physical data. What are we looking for? If we hit the square bracket, we can see that at the beginning we're just going to pull in that rating. How do we know which row to look in? We use the aggregate function because we want to pull in current status, which is the same thing as the most recent. I snuck a peek before and I saw that there were 3 empty rows before the first data row, so I don't need to go and look. And just as before, we've got a single criteria that is just based upon player name. So if I close that off, it's always going to be 1 because we're just looking for the most recent, which equates to the largest row. And so if I hit enter on that, we get excellent. Copy that and paste it in the other categories. We just have to do a quick edit to that column and we're good to go. We can copy that whole row, paste it in twice. We're looking for the actual result here. First test is yo-yo. Second is squat 1 RM. Next is 10 meter speed. And finally we've got counter movement jump. So we're progressing through these pretty quickly. I think we just have to replace rating with band. And we'll have completed this part pretty quick. A little bit of tidying up wouldn't be a bad thing to do here. The first thing I want to do is merge that. Then I'm going to format painter all the way across and then turn that off. Next I'm going to merge and vertically center. Once again, double click the format painter, because that'll keep it on and it'll allow me to apply that format as many times as I like. And now I'll turn it off. What I think I'll do is left align that, possibly delete that row out. For all of these we could use some of this increase in space to blow up the font. Similar on the headings. Because we've got a number, it does make it a good target for conditional formatting. Let's look at a new rule. Formatting cells based upon their values makes sense using a 2-color scale. Let's be stereotypical and use red. When the number is 1, and green when the number is 5. And so we've got a little bit of colour there now. You might do that, you might not, but whenever there's a number, a dashboard sort of lends itself quite nicely to having these kinds of features. This time I want to do something slightly different in this blank area here on the right. I'm going to go to the workings page to do that. I'm going to copy those notes there, paste it down. If I go back to the dashboard, on the developer tab, I want to insert a spin button. Doesn't matter what I do with it at the moment, I'm just going to draw it. Doesn't have any functionality at the moment. I need to right click on that and define what I want it to do. Get a wizard appear, and the most important thing for us is to set this up correctly. So we want the minimum value to be 1, we want the maximum value to be 4, incremental change to be 1, and the cell link to be on the working sheet. Okay, we go to the working sheet, just need to make sure that everyone knows this is where the spinner button has its value displaying. In the match performance data section, we used a reverse ordered scale to pull out the 5 most recent results for a rating score in the match data section. So I'm going to do the same thing, but depending on what that spinner is, I want to pull out the particular test of choice. And I can paste values to get those headings now into my sheet. Now we could do this a pretty simple way. The first step is really to go through the same process as we did above. So I could be clever here. I could copy that and paste it in. Just realign things a little bit. So instead of going from the match stats page, we are going from the physical data page. So just both references need to be corrected. Otherwise, it looks pretty good. If we drag this up, we can see that we have got results for this athlete in the 4th, 19th, 34th, 49th and 64th row of the table. Let's just check that out. The 4th row should contain data for Caitlin Anderson. And we can see that that's true. Right, let's go back to the workings now. We can write an index function. We should be getting pretty comfortable with these now. TBL physical data. We want the yo-yo result from this row of the table. And if I toggle my F4 button, I can lock the column on that, but not the row. Drag that down, drag that across, and that looks pretty good to me. Next thing's a little bit tricky to get your head round. I want to get the index of these 4 options, and to lock that, based upon this number here. So at the moment, the spinner is 1, and it is showing yo-yo. If I go back to the dashboard sheet, and I click it twice, it's showing 3. So that's good. Now I could extract the 5 speed results directly underneath here in a number of ways. I could use an H lookup, which isn't often done, or I could actually just modify the existing formula and drag it down and it'll do the job for us nicely. If I hit F4 and only lock the column but not the row, that should drag the reference down for us too. That looks pretty good to me. Let's just click on this 4th one and have a look and see what it's doing. It's still looking at the correct index number, and it's just moved that reference down. That's because those $signs aren't in place and the row is incrementing as I drag the formula down. So I'm going to insert a chart now, cut it out, put it on the dashboard. If I just get the spinner button out the way for now, I can put this in here a little bit smaller, something like that. I want to maximize the impact of your space, so a bit of fiddling is good. Now I could put the spinner button on the chart, and as I drag it we can see it disappears. So something called order that you can interact with whenever you use an object like a chart or a picture. I want to say bring to front. That'll make sure it's always on the front. If I have it selected and also click on the chart, I can group those two together, which means they will now move together, which is good. That's how I want it to behave. And just quickly, it's worth testing to make sure the spinner works. and so the positioning of that spinner isn't perfect because, as we saw with counter movement jump, it hides the last value if it happens to be high up. We could muck around with that, but let's not worry too much about it for now. It's really just a concept that I was keen to show you. To be consistent with what I've done previously, just going to add a data point to that last one. A little bit of tidying up, and we're good to go. I think what I'll do is just make that heading slightly bigger and a slightly different color just to make it stand out a bit. If I double click Format Painter on that, it'll allow me to put it in for both of these other two parts.